Have you ever wondered why your mind keeps returning to the same thoughts, the same worries, the same fears, the same stories? The moment life gets quiet, your mind gets busy, replaying the past, worrying about the future, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet. And no matter how much you've grown, you still find yourself pulled back into familiar mental loops. What if there was a hidden brain network influencing all of it? Today, that's what we are exploring, and we're going to explore the hidden reason you keep returning to the same version of yourself. But before we fully diving into today's Neuroessentials episode, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you. If you find yourself constantly consuming information, listening to podcasts, reading books, and learning about your patterns, yet you still feel like you're living inside the same stories, this is for you. Because awareness is powerful, and it's often the first step. But awareness alone doesn't create change. And that's exactly why I created She Who Aligns. This is not another resource designed to give you more information to think about. It's a guided journey designed to help you move from awareness into integration and expansion, to help you reconnect with your mind, your body, your nervous system, your emotions, your energy, and your inner truth, so that what you know can begin to become how you live. If you've been doing the work, but you're still feeling stuck in those loops, in familiar identities or familiar patterns, She Who Aligns was created to help you build that self-trust, that coherence that make lasting change possible. You're going to find the link in the show notes, or you can go to my website and purchase it. There is an instant download, so you can start working on it as soon as you get it. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, leaving a review is one of the best ways to support the show, support me, and help these conversations reach more women who are ready to move from awareness into alignment and sovereignty. Okay, friend, now let's dive into today's conversation. Welcome to Rewire to Align, a space where we break the patterns keeping you stuck and bring your brain, nervous system, and energy back into coherence. I'm Michelle Murray, neurospiritual alignment coach and creator of Align. This is where neuroscience meets spirituality, and where you stop overthinking and start understanding what's actually driving your reality. If you're ready to see yourself clearly and finally shift what's been looping, you're in the right place. Hello, friend. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome to Rewire to Align. My name is Michelle Marie. I'm a certified neurospiritual alignment coach, and every Tuesday we come here to speak about alignment, that coherence between your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies, so that you can create a life that reflects who you truly are. This is episode 81, and it lives under the Neuroessentials category inside the episode catalog. And you can find that catalog in the show notes. If you're here for the first time, I want to welcome you. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to invite you to use the episode catalog to binge on those topics that you feel most called to listen. Okay, I decided to jump in here and talk about this topic first because I haven't done a Neuroessentials episode in a while. And second, because I started noticing how often people talk about overthinking, anxiety, self-doubt, worry, and feeling stuck in the same mental loops. And I'm not talking about clients only. I am talking about friends, about family members, and honestly, myself at different points in life. And what fascinates me is that most of us spend so much time inside our minds, yet very few of us understand what the brain is actually doing during those moments. Ergo, why I recorded the episode. And today, we're going to explore something called the default mode network, which is a brain network that quietly operates behind the scenes of your everyday life. We're going to talk about why your mind keeps returning to certain thoughts, why rumination can feel impossible to shut off, how this network shapes your sense of identity, and why understanding it may completely change the way you view personal growth and transformation. Because the truth is, friend, most people have never heard of the default mode network. Have you heard about the default mode network? Yet, it quietly influences some of the most important parts of your daily life. And once you begin to understand what it's doing, you may find yourself looking at your thoughts, looking at your patterns, and even your relationship with yourself in a completely different way. Have you ever found yourself operating on autopilot while your mind is somewhere else entirely? Be honest with me, friend. Maybe you're driving to the grocery store, but your mind is replaying a conversation from earlier in the day, and you're so deep in the thought that before you realize it, what have you done? You have taken the route you normally take to work or to drop off your kids. Been there and done that, got the t-shirt. Your body knew where to go, but your attention was where? Somewhere else. Or maybe you arrived home and realized you barely remember the drive itself because your mind spent the entire time revisiting the past or worrying about the future or trying to solve a problem. And if you've ever experienced that, you're not alone. Everybody has gone through that. Psychology Today, which is a website that I do my research on, and it's a magazine as well. Psychology Today describes this as one of the ways the brain shifts into what it calls its default mode. And that's a state where the mind begins wandering through memories, future possibilities, worries, and internal stories, while the body continues moving through familiar routines. And sometimes that wandering is harmless. Sometimes it's creative. Sometimes it's imagining possibilities, future plans, or ideas you haven't explored yet. But other times, it becomes something else. It becomes replaying the same conversation over and over, revisiting the same disappointment, the same mistake, worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, trying to think your way out of a feeling that never seems to resolve. Have you been there? This is what psychologists call rumination. What's fascinating is that both the autopilot experience and the tendency to ruminate are connected to the same hidden brain network. To understand why this happens, we need to understand the default mode network, or DMN. Most people have never heard of it, yet it influences how you think, how you feel, how you perceive yourself, how you make decisions, how you worry, you ruminate, how you dream, how you create, and even experience spirituality. And for a long time, scientists believe that when we were not actively focused on a task, the brain was simply resting. And when I say for a long time, it's for a long time, because the default mode network came to people's attention in the 90s. So for a long time, scientists believed that when we were not actively focused on a task, the brain was simply resting. What researchers now know is that when your attention is no longer focused on the outside world, the brain doesn't simply go quiet. In many ways, it becomes incredibly active. A network of brain regions begins turning inward. It starts recalling memories, imagining future possibilities, reflecting on relationships, evaluating experiences, and making sense of who you are in the world. Researchers call this network the default mode network. And while I was doing my research for this episode, I was looking at certain episodes of different channels I follow about neuroscience, psychology, and also I was reading some articles, and I love this teacher, and she's a neuroscientist. She's amazing. And I was listening to her explaining this default mode network, and she jokingly referred to it as the brain me network, the me network. And well, that's obviously not the scientific term. It actually captures something important about what this network is doing, because the default mode network is deeply involved in self-referential thinking. It's constantly asking, what does this mean about me? What happened to me? What might happen to me next? What do other people think about me? Who am I in this situation? You see why she called it the me network? And before you think that's a bad thing, it's not a bad thing. This network is part of what allows you to have a sense of self in the first place. It's helping you connect your memories, your experiences, your relationships, your beliefs and hopes, your fears and expectations into a coherent narrative. In many ways, it's the brain's internal storyteller. You can say that it's a storyteller. One researcher in one of the episodes that I saw described the default mode network as helping create a unifying sense of self, a continuous narrative that ties together your memories, experiences, beliefs, and identity. You could almost think of it as the brain constantly updating the story of who you are. And while that story helps create stability and coherence, it also helps explain why change can feel so difficult. Because your brain isn't simply remembering your past. It's using your past to continuously reinforce a story about who you are. And this is where I think things become incredibly important for personal growth, and why I brought this topic into the podcast. Most people believe that if they think about something long enough, they'll eventually solve it. Yes or no? If they replay the conversation one more time, analyze the situation from another angle, or revisit the mistake often enough, they'll finally arrive at clarity. Has this happened to you, friend? But neurologically, rumination often isn't problem solving. It's identity maintenance. Let that sink in. I'm going to repeat it. Neurologically, rumination often isn't problem solving. It's identity maintenance. Because when you're replaying the rejection, the disappointment, the failure, the fear, the mistake, whatever story you're replaying, your brain is often reinforcing the existing story rather than creating a new one. If the story is that you're not good enough, your mind starts collecting evidence. If the story is that people always leave you, your mind starts collecting evidence. If the story is that you never follow through, your mind starts collecting evidence. Part of what makes this so powerful is that the brain doesn't just maintain a story. It also looks for what? For evidence to support it. And you may have heard me talk in previous episodes about the reticular activating system. Think of it as one of the brain's filtering system. Every second, your brain is receiving an overwhelming amount of information. And you have to filter that information, because if not, your brain is going to explode, right? So it has to decide what is important enough to bring it into conscious awareness. And what often determines what's important? The story you are ready telling yourself. If your default mode network is maintaining a narrative that says, I'm not good enough, the brain becomes more likely to notice experiences that appear to support that belief, right? That's where the reticular activating system comes in. If the story is, people always leave, the brain becomes more attuned to signs of rejection, of distance, or disconnection. If the story is, I never follow through, the brain will often remember the times you didn't, and it's gonna remember it more easily than the times you did. This doesn't mean the brain is trying to hurt you, friend. It's trying to create coherence, and coherence is often prioritized over transformation. The default mode network helps maintain the story, and the brain's filtering system or the reticular activating system help gather evidence that makes the story feel true. And what happens over time is that that story can begin to feel less like a belief and more like reality. In fact, research has linked increased activity in the default mode network with rumination, with depression, with loneliness, and repetitive self-focused thinking. Psychology Today describes how the mind can become hijacked by cycles of revisiting worries, revisiting regrets, fears, and future concerns. And I think many people know exactly what that feels like. You start thinking about one thing, and before you know it, you've mentally traveled through 5 years of memory, 3 future scenarios, and an entire imaginary conversation that hasn't even happened yet. The interesting thing is that the default mode network isn't the bad cop in the story. In fact, it's responsible for some of the most beautiful aspects of being human. The same network that allows you to replay the past also allows you to imagine the future. The same network that can keep you attached to an old identity also helps you envision a new possibility. Researchers believe the default mode network plays an important role in creativity, imagination, and future visioning. When the mind wanders, right, when you're daydreaming, it isn't always getting lost. Sometimes it's generating ideas, making connection, and creating possibilities that were not visible before. What matters is learning to recognize when it's helping you create new possibilities and when it's quietly replaying a familiar story, right? That distinction. And this is often the place where awareness stops and transformation never fully begins. Because you become aware of the story and you understand the pattern, you can explain where it came from, you know why you do what you do, but awareness alone doesn't create the transformation. And this is why inside my Aligned to Sovereignty process, awareness is only the beginning. Awareness is going to help you recognize the story. Liberation creates the space between you and the story. Integration turns insight into lived experience. Grounding and growth expands and grounds what feels possible. And next level embodiment is where the new reality begins to feel natural, because understanding the default mode network is super powerful, but information alone doesn't create transformation, friend. The invitation is learning how to relate to it differently. And perhaps this is where the conversation we're having right now becomes empowering, because once you recognize that your brain is constantly creating meaning, telling stories, imagining possibilities, and rehearsing identities, you can begin participating more consciously in that process. If the same network can replay your fears, then it also can help you envision a future you've never experienced before. If it can rehearse a rejection, it also can rehearse possibility. if it can keep returning to an old version of you, it can also help you imagine a new one. And this is where the relationship between the default mode network and the reticular activating system becomes really interesting. Earlier in the episode, we talked about how the brain looks for evidence that supports the story it already believes, right? Part of the reticular activating system job is helping determine what gets your attention and what fades into the background. Because if not, again, your brain will explode, which means that when the story begins to change, what you notice can begin to change as well. This is why becoming very intentional is so important. When you begin exposing yourself to new experiences, new environments, new perspectives, new possibilities, and new evidence, the brain begins gathering information that supports a different story. And friend, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen through force, and not because you're pretending something is true when it's not, but because through repetition, because remember, the brain loves repetition, you're gradually expanding what your brain recognizes as possible. And this is exactly what I see happen inside the grounding and growth phase of my Aligned to Sovereignty process. You begin gathering new evidence for what is possible, expanding your capacity for change, and creating the coherence required for a new reality to feel true. Because transformation is not about fighting the mind. It's about creating enough coherence that the brain, the nervous system, your emotions, your identity, and your actions begin telling the same story. And this is where neuroscience and spirituality begin to beautifully overlap. Before we move to the last part of this episode, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you if you're recognizing yourself in this conversation. Maybe you're realizing that you've spent years understanding your pattern, learning about yourself, and becoming incredibly self-aware. Yet somehow, you still find yourself returning to the same stories, to the same emotional loops, and the same version of yourself. Because awareness is powerful, but awareness alone doesn't create transformation. And that's exactly why I created She Who Aligns. Not to give you more information to think about, friend, but to help you move from awareness to integration into next level embodiment through my Align process. It is a beautiful guided journey, and it is designed to help you create coherence between your physical, your mental, your emotional and spiritual bodies, so that self-trust, alignment, and sovereignty becomes something you live, not something you simply understand. If you're realizing that what's missing isn't more awareness, but deeper integration, I'm going to leave the link in the show notes for you so that you can explore She Who Aligns. Now, let's get back to the last part of the episode. For thousands of years, spiritual traditions have taught that suffering increases when we become completely identified with the mind and decreases when we learn to observe it. What's fascinating is that modern research has found that practices like meditation can quiet activity where? In the default mode network. When that happens, people often report feeling more present, less attached to their thoughts, more connected to life, and less consumed by their personal story. Some describe it as peace, some describe it as oneness, some describe it as a deeper connection to God, to source, or to universal consciousness, or whatever you call it. And I'm curious if you've ever noticed this in your life, in yourself. Have you ever been in meditation, in prayer, in breath work, which is so powerful, in nature, or even a moment of complete stillness, and suddenly felt less caught up in your thoughts, less consumed by your worries, less attached to the story your mind was telling? Maybe nothing in your external world had changed, yet your experience of it felt completely different. From a neuroscience perspective, the storyteller, the default mode network, becomes quieter. From a spiritual perspective, awareness becomes larger than the story. Different language, same experience. And what I've come to realize is that many of us spend years trying to change our lives without realizing we're still relating to ourselves through the same internal story. We learn new information, we gain new awareness, we set new goals, but underneath it all, the same narrative is quietly running in the background. The same assumptions, the same fears, the same protective parts stepping in to keep us safe, the same conclusions about who we are and what is possible for us. And when that happens, it can feel as though life keeps repeating itself. Not because you're incapable of change, but because the story has become so familiar that you no longer recognize it as a story. You experience it as reality. And perhaps that's the real invitation of this conversation, because your brain is constantly maintaining a story of who you are. Transformation becomes possible when that story stops being the only reality you can see. And sovereignty begins when you realize that while you may have thoughts, you are not your thoughts. You may have a story, but you are not limited to the story your mind has been rehearsing or telling yourself. Through awareness, through integration, and through alignment, you can begin creating enough coherence between all your bodies, right? The 4 bodies that I mentioned, the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual, that a new reality no longer feels foreign. It simply feels true. And perhaps the question I want to leave you with today is, what story has your mind been rehearsing so often that it has started to feel like reality? Because once you can see the story, it no longer gets to define what is possible for you. And in that space, new possibilities begin to emerge. Amiga, as we begin wrapping up today's conversation, I want to leave you with that question one more time. What story has your mind been rehearsing so often that it has started to feel like reality? Not the story you tell other people, not the story you know isn't serving you, the story that feels so familiar you rarely stop to question it. Maybe it's a story about your worth. Maybe it's a story about what's possible for you. Maybe it's a story about relationships, success, safety, belonging, or who you believe yourself to be. Whatever surfaced for you today, I encourage you to spend some time with it this week. Not to judge it, not to force it to change, just to notice, because awareness is where transformation begins. And if you'd like to share what came up for you, I would love to hear from you. Come join us inside the Rewire to Align community on Facebook, and let's continue this conversation there. One of the things I learned through my own journey and through working with so many women is that healing, growth, and transformation are not always meant to happen in isolation. Sometimes we need spaces where we can speak the things we've only been carrying inside our minds, spaces where we realize we're not the only ones navigating these patterns, these stories, and these experiences. You're going to find the link to the community in the show notes. And if you're ready for deeper support, remember that you're going to find the information about She Who Aligns and also about my coaching container. Beautiful soul, the default mode network may help maintain the story of who you've been. Alignment is what creates the coherence to become who you're here to be. I'm sending you so much love. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I love creating it. If what you heard today resonated with you, the best way to support the show is by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback helps me continue creating content that empowers you and deepens your spiritual connection. Just scroll down to write a review and share your thoughts. And if you love what Rewire to Align is about, share it with your friends and family. I truly believe the world transforms when we come together to create positive change. I look forward to be with you again next week.